She had 3 seconds. 3 seconds to decide between staying invisible or saving a stranger's life. 3 seconds to choose between the safety of her daughter and the life of a man she didn't even know. 3 seconds that would change absolutely everything. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is going to be one of those dramatic stories where everything happens fast and loud, right? But here's the truth. The most important moments in our lives, they don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive quietly, dressed up as ordinary seconds. And we don't even realize we're standing at a crossroads until we've already chosen our path. This is the story of Emma Rodriguez. And I promise you, by the time we're done here, you'll never look at a simple act of kindness the same way again. Let me take you back to where it all started. Emma was 26 years old. If you passed her on the street in Boston, you probably wouldn't notice her. She wore simple clothes. She kept her head down. She moved through the world like a shadow, like someone who didn't want to be seen. And that was exactly the point. You see, Emma had learned something important over the years. She'd learned that being invisible meant being safe. When nobody notices you, nobody can hurt you. Nobody can judge you. Nobody can take anything away from you. But let me tell you about the life Emma was living. Because invisible or not, this woman was working harder than most people could even imagine. 3 jobs. That's right. 3 jobs. She worked the morning shift at a small cafe downtown. The kind of place where business people grab coffee before rushing to their important meetings. Then, during lunch hours, she worked at a bakery on the south side, boxing up pastries and sandwiches for people who had the luxury of taking lunch breaks. But her main job? Her main job was at night, at a fancy restaurant called Marcelo's. Now, Marcelo's wasn't just any restaurant. This was the kind of place where a single meal could cost more than Emma made in an entire week. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Soft piano music floated through the air. Rich people came there to eat food with names Emma couldn't even pronounce. And Emma? She was a waitress. She wore black shoes that made her feet ache after the first hour. She carried heavy trays. She smiled at customers who sometimes looked right through her, like she was part of the furniture. But she did it all without complaining. Because Emma had a reason for everything. Her name was Sophia. 6 years old. Missing her 2 front teeth. Eyes that sparkled when she laughed. A little girl who loved her stuffed rabbit more than anything in the world. Sophia was Emma's daughter. Her whole world. The reason she got up every morning, no matter how tired she was. The reason she smiled even when her feet hurt and her back ached, and she was so exhausted she could barely think straight. You see, 3 years before this story really begins, Emma had escaped from something terrible. She'd been in a relationship with a man who hurt her, who made her feel small and worthless, who made her believe she was nothing. But one day, a woman at a pharmacy had slipped Emma a piece of paper. Just a phone number. Nothing else. That woman had seen something in Emma's eyes. Maybe fear. Maybe desperation. Maybe hope. That phone number was for a women's shelter. Emma made the call. She left with nothing but Sophia in her arms and hope in her heart. No money. No plan. Just the fierce determination to give her daughter a better life. And for 3 years, she'd been rebuilding. $1 at a time. 1 shift at a time. 1 step at a time. Every penny she made went into an envelope hidden under her mattress. She was saving for nursing school. Emma wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to help people. She wanted to heal them. She wanted to be more than just invisible. But nursing school was expensive. So expensive that sometimes Emma wondered if she'd ever save enough. But she kept trying. Because that's what you do when you have a daughter watching you. You don't give up. You never give up. It was a rainy October night. The kind of night where the rain doesn't just fall, it pours. The streets of Boston turned into rivers of light and shadow. Cars splashed through puddles. People hurried past with umbrellas, trying to stay dry. Inside Marcelo's, everything felt warm and safe. The restaurant was busy that night. Every table was full. Emma moved through the dining room like she always did. Quietly. Efficiently. Invisible. She refilled water glasses. She cleared plates. She smiled when people made eye contact, which wasn't often. And then he walked in. His name was Alexander Hayes. Even if you didn't know who he was, you could feel it. That presence. That power. He was 28 years old, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Emma's car. He moved with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Never having to count pennies. Never having to wonder if you can afford to feed your child this week. Alexander Hayes wasn't just rich. He was a billionaire. One of those people you read about in business magazines. He'd inherited his family's empire when his father died 2 years earlier. Real estate, technology, investments that stretched across the entire country. Some people called him a genius. Others called him ruthless. But everyone agreed on one thing. Alexander Hayes was someone you didn't mess with. Emma watched as the restaurant manager practically bowed when greeting him. She watched as the best server appeared instantly, ready to serve. She felt the energy in the entire room change. Everyone stood a little straighter, smiled a little brighter, and then her manager called her over. "Emma," he said, his voice serious. "You're serving the private dining room tonight. Mr. Hayes and his business partners. This is important. Perfect service. And absolute silence about anything you see or hear. Understood?" Emma nodded. She understood perfectly. In 3 years at Marcelo's, she'd learned that some tables required more than just good service. They required you to be deaf and blind to whatever was being discussed, to serve the food and disappear, to be invisible. And Emma was very good at being invisible. The private dining room was beautiful. Deep red walls, a crystal chandelier that sparkled like diamonds, windows overlooking the rainy city below, a table set for 5 people, each place setting arranged perfectly. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his back to the wall. Emma noticed that immediately. He'd positioned himself so he could see everything. Every entrance, every exit, every person who walked past. 4 other men joined him. All older, all powerful looking, all speaking in that careful way that means something more than what they're actually saying. Emma served them water, then wine, then appetizers. She moved quietly, professionally, trying to be invisible like always. But something felt different tonight. Something in the air made her nervous, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the men kept glancing at each other. Maybe it was the tension she could feel, even though everyone was smiling. Or maybe it was the way Alexander kept watching her. Not in a creepy way. Not like he was interested in her romantically, but like he was studying her, cataloging every movement, every detail. His dark eyes missed nothing. It made Emma uncomfortable, but she pushed the feeling away. This wasn't her business. This wasn't her concern. She just needed to do her job, collect her paycheck, and get home to Sophia. The last person arrived late. His name was Philip Morgan. He was younger than the others, maybe in his mid-30s. He apologized about traffic, shook Alexander's hand warmly like they were old friends, and took his seat with an easy smile. Emma poured his wine and stepped back to her position near the door. Everything seemed normal. Just another business dinner. Just another night. But Emma's instincts were screaming at her. Those instincts that had been sharpened by years of surviving. Years of reading people. Years of knowing when something was wrong. Something about Philip's smile didn't reach his eyes. Something about the way he held his shoulders seemed too tight. Too controlled. She pushed the thought away. It was nothing. She was being paranoid. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, she would make a choice that would save a man's life and change her own forever. The dinner continued like a carefully choreographed dance. Emma brought pasta. Then the main course. Expensive steaks cooked to perfection. Fresh fish that probably cost more than her rent. The men ate and talked. Their conversation flowed around her like water around stone. She refilled glasses. She cleared plates. She smiled when appropriate and stayed silent the rest of the time. But she couldn't shake that feeling. That something was wrong. And then it happened. Emma was refilling water glasses, moving around the table. As she reached for Alexander's glass, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. Philip was reaching across the table. It looked like he was reaching for the salt shaker. His other hand was pointing at some papers on the table, drawing attention to a chart or graph. But Emma saw what no one else did. In Philip's palm was something tiny, so small you'd miss it if you blinked. A little vial, barely visible. And as his hand passed over Alexander's wine glass, just for a second, just for the briefest moment, she saw him tilt his fingers. Something dropped into the deep red wine. It disappeared instantly, like it was never there. Time seemed to stop. Emma's heart hammered in her chest so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Her mind raced. Had she really seen that? Was she imagining things? Maybe it was medicine. Maybe it was nothing. But the way Philip's eyes darted around, checking if anyone was watching. The way his movements were so practiced, so smooth. The way he immediately returned to the conversation like nothing had happened. Emma knew. She knew with absolute certainty that something terrible had just happened. and in about 30 seconds, Alexander Hayes would raise that glass to his lips. Her thoughts flashed to Sophia, 6 years old, waiting at home with Mrs. Chun, their elderly neighbor. Sophia needed her mother. Sophia depended on Emma making smart, safe decisions. Walking away now would be the smart thing. The safe thing. Nobody would ever know she saw anything. She could finish her shift. Go home. Kiss her daughter goodnight. Pretend this never happened. But then Emma looked at Alexander's face. A human being. Someone's son. Maybe someone's brother or friend. A person who was about to drink poison and had absolutely no idea. 3 seconds. That's all she had. 3 seconds to choose who she really was. Emma's body made the decision before her mind could stop it. As she moved back toward Alexander's seat, her elbow accidentally knocked his water glass. It was perfectly clumsy. Believable enough to be real. Forceful enough to send ice water cascading directly into his lap. "Oh my God!" Emma gasped, her shock genuine even though the action wasn't. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Alexander stood immediately, ice water dripping from his expensive suit. The entire table went silent. One of the men laughed nervously, breaking the tension. But Alexander wasn't laughing. He was staring at Emma with an intensity that took her breath away. Not angry. Surprised. And something else she couldn't identify. "It's fine," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that silenced the nervous laughter. "Accidents happen. Let me get towels," Emma said, already moving toward the kitchen. "And I'll bring fresh water and wine immediately." In the kitchen, her hands shook as she grabbed clean linens. Her manager appeared beside her, his face worried. "What happened?" he demanded. "You spilled water on Alexander Hayes?" "It was an accident," Emma said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I need fresh linens and a new wine glass." She returned with towels and a fresh place setting, very aware that everyone was watching her now. Alexander had sat back down, his expression unreadable. "Again, my deepest apologies, sir," Emma said, laying out the fresh linens. "Let me get you a new glass of wine." As she reached for the contaminated wine glass, Alexander's hand moved. Fast, catching her wrist. Not painfully, but firmly enough to stop her. Emma froze. Her heart pounded. "Leave it," Alexander said softly, his eyes locked on hers. It wasn't a request. Emma nodded and stepped back. She watched as Alexander carefully pushed the wine glass aside. Out of reach. Away from him. Then he turned back to his guests, back to business, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Emma knew it. And from the sudden tension in Philip Morgan's shoulders, he knew it too. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Emma served dessert with robotic precision. Her mind was racing, but her body went through the motions automatically. Smile. Clear plates. Refill glasses. Smile again. The conversation at the table had changed. It became more forced. More uncomfortable. Philip had grown quieter, his easy smile now strained. When Philip excused himself to use the restroom, Emma noticed how Alexander's eyes followed him. Dark. Thoughtful. Calculating. 5 minutes later, there was a commotion. Philip emerged from the restroom, supported by 2 servers. His face was pale and covered in sweat. He looked like he might collapse right there. "I'm fine," Philip was saying, though he clearly wasn't. "Just felt suddenly sick. Must be the flu or something." One of the men jumped up. "You look terrible. We should call a doctor." No, Philip protested weakly. "I just need to go home. I'm sorry to end the evening early." Alexander stood slowly. His face was calm. Too calm. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Feel better, Philip." The words were polite, but there was something underneath them. Something cold. Emma watched as Alexander glanced at the wine glass, still sitting where he'd pushed it aside. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He knew. Somehow, Alexander Hayes had understood exactly what happened. And now he was looking at her. Their eyes met across the room. 3 heartbeats. Neither looked away. In that gaze, Emma saw intelligence, curiosity, and something that might have been respect, or might have been danger. She couldn't tell which. Then Alexander turned back to his guests, and the moment broke. But Emma knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed forever. The dinner ended shortly after Philip left. The remaining men paid their bill, including a tip so large that Emma stared at the receipt twice to make sure she'd counted correctly. They gathered their coats and disappeared into the rainy Boston night. But Alexander Hayes stayed behind. Emma was clearing the private dining room, stacking plates with trembling hands, when she felt his presence in the doorway. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished her task, taking a moment to steady herself, before finally meeting his gaze. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Alexander didn't answer right away. He stood there, hands in his pockets, studying her with that same intense focus. "That was quite a spill," he finally said, his voice neutral. "Yes, sir. Again, my apologies." Interesting timing. Emma's hands stilled on the plates. Her mind raced through possible responses. Denial seemed pointless. This man saw too much. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "accidents happen at exactly the right moment." The corner of Alexander's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Indeed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out several bills. Hundreds. More money than Emma made in 2 weeks. He laid them on the table. "For the inconvenience," he said. "And the dry cleaning." Emma looked at the money, then back at him. "That's not necessary, sir. I insist. I can't accept this." "You can," Alexander said quietly. "And you will. Because I think you know that what you did tonight was worth far more than a few $100s. Before Emma could respond, he turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. "Be careful, Emma," he said softly. Her breath caught. How did he know her name? Of course. The reservation would have listed the server. But hearing it from his lips made everything feel more real. More dangerous. "Some things," Alexander continued, "once seen can't be unseen. And some people don't forget acts of kindness." Then he was gone. Emma stood alone in the empty room, her heart racing. She stared at the money on the table for a long moment. Pride wrestled with practicality. Sophia needed new winter boots. The rent was due next week. The envelope under her mattress still wasn't full enough for nursing school. Finally, practicality won. It always did. But as Emma pocketed the bills, she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this money meant accepting something bigger. A connection to Alexander Hayes that she didn't understand and hadn't asked for. The rest of her shift passed in a daze. She served other tables. She smiled at other customers. But her mind kept returning to that moment. The wine glass. The choice. The look in Alexander's eyes when he'd understood what she'd done. Finally, her shift ended. Emma changed out of her work clothes, collected her tips, and headed out into the cold October night. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the city lights in pools of color. The subway ride home felt longer than usual. Every face seemed suspicious. Every glance felt weighted with meaning. Emma told herself she was being paranoid, but she couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest. When she finally got home to her small apartment, Mrs. Chun was dozing on the couch. The elderly woman woke with a start. "Oh, Emma dear," she said. "Sophia was perfect as always. She's been asleep since 8:30. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Chun." Emma pressed money into the older woman's hand. Less than she'd have liked to give, but all she could afford. After Mrs. Chun left, Emma checked on Sophia. Her daughter was fast asleep, one arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, her face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. Emma stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. This is why, she thought. This is why I work 3 jobs. Why I accept help from neighbors. Why I count every penny. This little girl is everything. She leaned down and kissed Sophia's forehead gently, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I love you, baby," she whispered. "Everything I do is for you." In her own room, Emma counted her tips in the dim light. She added Alexander's money to her savings envelope, watching the stack grow just a little bit thicker. Still not enough for nursing school. Still so far from her dream. But closer than yesterday. She stood at her window, looking out at the city lights in the distance. Somewhere out there, Alexander Hayes was probably asking questions. Investigating what happened tonight. And somehow, Emma was at the center of it all. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. But deep down, she knew. She'd made a choice. She'd chosen courage over safety. She'd chosen to save a stranger's life. And now she had to live with whatever came next. Emma crawled into bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. Her mind kept replaying those 3 seconds. The moment when she could have looked away. The moment when she could have stayed invisible. But she hadn't. And as she finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of the morning, one thought kept circling through her mind. Everything has changed. And there was no going back. What happens when the people behind the conspiracy realize their plan failed? What will Emma do when the threats start coming closer to home? And how far will Alexander go to protect the woman who saved his life? Stay with me for Chapter 2, where everything Emma built is about to be tested. You know that feeling when you know something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's how the next few days felt for Emma. On the surface, everything seemed normal. She woke up, made breakfast for Sophia, walked her daughter to school, went to her cafe shift, picked Sophia up, worked her evening shift at Marcelo's. The same routine she'd followed for 3 years. But nothing felt normal anymore. Emma found herself looking over her shoulder, noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. Like the same gray sedan parked outside the cafe 2 days in a row. Or the man in the dark coat she saw on her subway car 3 mornings that week. Was she imagining it? Was her mind creating threats that didn't exist? She wanted to believe she was just being paranoid. But her instincts, those same instincts that had saved Alexander Hayes' life, kept screaming at her that something was wrong. On the 3rd day after the dinner, her phone rang. Unknown number. Emma stared at the screen, her heart pounding. For a moment, she almost didn't answer. But something made her press the green button. Hello, Miss Rodriguez? The voice was professional, unfamiliar. My name is James Barrett. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Alexander Hayes. He'd like to meet with you to discuss what happened at Marcelo's. Emma's mouth went dry. I don't think that's a good idea. He's willing to compensate you for your time. Generously. Every instinct screamed at Emma to refuse. To hang up. To pretend this call never happened. But that practical voice in her head, the one that always calculated costs and benefits, the one that thought about Sophia's needs, spoke louder. When? She heard herself ask. Tonight. 7 o'clock. There's a coffee shop on Commonwealth Avenue. Bella's Cafe. Mr. Hayes will meet you there. Emma closed her eyes. I'll be there. After hanging up, she sat in stunned silence. What was she doing? Why was she agreeing to this? But deep down she knew. Because Alexander Hayes was right. What happened that night couldn't be ignored. It had tied them together whether she wanted it or not. And maybe, just maybe, he had answers to the questions that were keeping her awake at night. That evening, Emma dropped Sophia off with Mrs. Chun. She kissed her daughter goodbye, held her a little tighter than usual, and headed toward Commonwealth Avenue. Toward Alexander Hayes. Toward whatever came next. Bella's Cafe was warm and cozy. Soft lighting. The rich smell of coffee filling the air. Small tables scattered throughout, occupied by students with laptops, couples sharing desserts, people reading quietly in corners. Emma spotted Alexander immediately. He sat at a back table, a cup of espresso in front of him. Untouched. When he saw her enter, he stood. A gesture of courtesy that seemed almost old-fashioned. Miss Rodriguez, he said. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure I had much choice, Emma replied, sitting down across from him. Something flickered in Alexander's eyes. Maybe amusement. Maybe respect. There's always a choice, he said quietly. You could have refused. A waiter appeared. Emma ordered water. Despite Alexander's offer to buy her anything she wanted, she needed to keep her boundaries clear. After the waiter left, they sat in silence for a moment. Alexander studied her with that intense gaze that made Emma feel like he could see straight through to her soul. I had the wine tested, he finally said, his voice low. Emma's breath caught. The glass you made sure I didn't drink from. Alexander paused. Concentrated poison. Enough to cause a heart attack within 20 minutes. By the time anyone realized what was happening, I would have been dead. He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather instead of his own murder. Philip, Emma whispered. Philip Morgan has disappeared, Alexander said. His apartment is empty. His phone is disconnected. He's probably in another country by now. Emma's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her water glass. I don't understand. Why would he do that? Why would someone want to kill you? Alexander leaned back in his chair. A shadow crossed his face. My father built an empire over 40 years, he began. Real estate. Technology. Investments. He was brilliant, but he was also ruthless. He made enemies. He destroyed competitors. He did things that weren't always legal. Emma listened, trying to reconcile this with the man sitting across from her. When he died 2 years ago, I inherited everything, Alexander continued, including the expectation that I would run the business exactly as he did. But I didn't want that. I've been trying to change things. Make the company legitimate. Ethical. Clean up the damage my father did. His voice hardened. And Philip disagreed with that. He and others in the company saw my changes as weakness, as betrayal. Philip was promised a high position in the old structure. My reforms threatened his future. So he made a choice. He tried to remove me. The waiter brought Emma's water. She waited until he left before speaking again. So what happens now? Now I need to find out who else was involved, Alexander said. Philip didn't plan this alone. Someone higher up orchestrated everything. Someone who knew my schedule, my movements, who could arrange things. He paused, and his eyes grew serious. Concerned. And those people know their plan failed. They're going to wonder why. They're going to want to know if you saw something. If you know something. Fear gripped Emma's chest. What does that mean for me? It means, Alexander said carefully, that you might be in danger. I have a daughter. Emma's voice broke slightly. She's 6 years old. She needs me. I know. Alexander's voice softened. I know about Sophia. I know she's in first grade. I know Mrs. Chen watches her when you work. I know you're saving for nursing school. Tears burned in Emma's eyes. Partly from fear. Partly from anger at this invasion of her privacy. You had no right to investigate me, she said. I had every right to know about the woman who saved my life, Alexander replied. Then his expression softened. But I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you so you understand the situation. So you can protect yourself and your daughter. How am I supposed to do that? Emma's voice rose slightly. I don't even know who these people are. Alexander pulled out a business card. Simple. White. With just a phone number printed on it. He slid it across the table. This number reaches me directly. 24 hours a day. If anything seems wrong, if anyone approaches you, if you feel unsafe for any reason, you call immediately. Emma stared at the card like it was a live snake. I don't want this, she said. I don't want any connection to your world. Neither did I, if I'm honest. Alexander's smile was rueful. You've complicated my life, Emma Rodriguez. But you also saved it. And that means I'm responsible for keeping you safe. I just want my normal life back. Then help me end this threat, Alexander said. Let me find who's behind the conspiracy. Once they're dealt with, you can go back to being invisible. I'll go back to my world. Our paths won't cross again. Emma looked at the business card, then at Alexander's face. Despite her fear and anger, she saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Genuine concern. Maybe even loneliness. She took the card. What do I do now? She asked quietly. Now you go home. You kiss Sophia goodnight. You go to work tomorrow like nothing has changed. But you stay alert. Trust your instincts. They've served you well so far. He paused. And Emma, thank you. Not many people would have done what you did. Then he stood, left money on the table for their drinks, and walked out into the Boston night. Emma sat alone for a few minutes, the business card feeling heavy in her pocket. Through the cafe window, she watched people walking past. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the danger and complications that had suddenly entered hers. Finally, she stood and headed home. To Sophia. To the small apartment that suddenly didn't feel quite as safe as it used to. The phone call came 3 nights later. Emma was making dinner with Sophia. They were cutting vegetables together, laughing at Sophia's knock-knock jokes when her phone rang. Unknown number. Emma's heart stopped. Hello, Miss Rodriguez? The voice was rough. Professional. This is Detective Frank Morrison with the Boston Police Department. I need to ask you some questions about an incident at Marcelo's restaurant on October 14th. Emma's blood went cold. What kind of incident? I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning? I work tomorrow morning. This is important, Miss Rodriguez. A man is dead. The world tilted. What? Who? Philip Morgan. His body was found in the river this morning. Evidence suggests poisoning. We have witnesses placing him at Marcelo's the night before he died. You served his table. Emma's hands shook. I don't know anything about. I'm sure you don't, the voice interrupted. But you might have seen something without realizing it. Please, Miss Rodriguez. 10 o'clock tomorrow. District 12 on Boylston Street. The line went dead. Emma stood frozen, her mind racing. Sophia tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, are you okay? I'm fine, baby. Emma forced a smile. Just work stuff. But her hands were still shaking as she pulled out Alexander's business card and dialed the number with trembling fingers. He answered immediately. Emma. Just her name. But the way he said it, like he'd been expecting her call, like he'd been waiting, sent relief flooding through her. The police called, she said, her voice barely steady. They said Philip is dead. They want me to come in for questioning tomorrow. A pause. Then Alexander's voice, calm but absolute. Don't go. What? I can't just ignore the police. That wasn't a real detective, Emma. Alexander's voice was firm. The Boston PD doesn't call witnesses at 10 at night. They show up at your door with a badge. That was someone pretending to be police, fishing for information. How do you know? Because Philip Morgan isn't dead. He's in Montreal, hiding in a hotel under a fake name. My people found him this afternoon. New fear replaced the old. Then who was on the phone? Someone who wants to know what you saw. Someone who's trying to scare you into revealing information. She heard movement on his end. Where are you right now? Home. Sophia's here. Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone. I'm sending security to watch your building tonight. Alexander, I can't live like this. Emma's voice broke. I can't have my daughter living in fear. I know. His voice softened. I know this isn't fair. But right now, my priority is keeping you and Sophia safe. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next steps. What steps? How does this end? Trust me. Please. After they hung up, Emma did a circuit of the apartment. She checked every lock, every window, every door. This was her home, her safe space, the place she'd built for herself and Sophia after escaping and starting over with nothing. And now it felt violated. She stood in Sophia's doorway, watching her daughter play with her stuffed rabbit, completely unaware that their world had changed. Emma made a silent promise to that little girl. Whatever it took, she would keep Sophia safe, even if that meant accepting help from Alexander Hayes. Around 3 a.m, Emma heard it. Someone testing her doorknob, checking if it was locked. She froze, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The sound stopped. Then came a soft knock, barely audible. She didn't move, didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, footsteps retreated down the hallway. Emma grabbed her phone with shaking hands. Before she could dial, a text came through from Alexander's number. My security just confronted someone outside your building. Male, approximately 30. He claimed to be looking for apartment 4B. Your building only goes to 3F. He left when challenged. Are you and Sophia okay? Emma typed back with trembling fingers. We're fine. Scared, but fine. The response came immediately. Pack a bag. Enough for a few days. We're moving you somewhere safe. I can't just leave. I have work. Sophia has school. Call in sick. Sophia can miss a few days. This isn't negotiable anymore, Emma. Someone just tried to get into your apartment. Emma looked around at her small home. The place that represented everything she'd fought for. Everything she'd built. But she thought about that doorknob turning. About someone trying to get in. She typed 1 hour. Be ready. The safe house was beautiful. Emma hadn't expected that. When Alexander said he was moving them somewhere safe, she'd imagined something cold and industrial. A warehouse maybe. Or a cheap motel. Instead, they drove for about an hour outside Boston, eventually turning into a long driveway that led to a white house with blue shutters. Surrounded by trees. Peaceful. The kind of place Emma had only seen in magazines. Alexander stood on the front porch, coffee in hand, watching their arrival as dawn broke over the trees. As Emma stepped out of the car with Sophia in her arms, still half asleep and clutching her stuffed rabbit, she felt like she was crossing a threshold she could never uncross. Her old life, the cramped apartment, the 3 jobs, the careful invisibility, was receding behind her like a dream fading in daylight. Welcome, Alexander said quietly as they approached. You're safe here. Both of you. And despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion and the impossibility of this entire situation, Emma believed him. Sophia woke up fully when they got inside. Her eyes went wide at the beautiful house. Mommy, where are we? This is Mr. Hayes' house, baby. We're going to stay here for a little while. Like a vacation? Emma's heart squeezed. Something like that. Alexander showed them to their room. It was bigger than Emma's entire apartment. 2 beds. A bathroom with a tub deep enough for Sophia to swim in. Windows overlooking the trees. I know this isn't what you wanted, Alexander said quietly while Sophia explored. But I promise you, I'm working on fixing this. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. I can't hide for 2 weeks. You're not hiding. You're staying safe while I handle things. How? How do you handle people who want you dead? Alexander's jaw tightened. Not through violence, if that's what you're asking. Through evidence. Financial records. Recorded conversations. I'm going to expose them legally. Make sure they can't hurt anyone else. Emma searched his face. Looking for what, she didn't know. Reassurance? Truth. Why are you doing this? She asked. You could just hire bodyguards for yourself and forget about me. Because you risked everything for me, Alexander said simply. And I don't forget that kind of courage. The 2 weeks that followed were the strangest of Emma's life. During the day, she and Sophia existed in a bubble of safety. They walked in the woods behind the house. They made cookies in the enormous kitchen. They read books and played games, and for the first time in 3 years, Emma didn't worry about money or jobs or survival. But at night, after Sophia fell asleep, Emma would find Alexander in his study. Working. Always working. He showed her what he'd found. Financial trails proving Philip wasn't working alone. Recorded phone calls with other executives. Evidence of a conspiracy that went deeper than either of them had imagined. There are 4 others involved, Alexander explained one night, his face illuminated by his computer screen. Senior executives who stood to lose millions if my reforms continued. They hired Philip to do the actual work, but they orchestrated everything. What happens when you expose them? They go to jail. The company gets cleaned up. And you and Sophia go home safe. Emma studied his face in the dim light. You could have died. But I didn't. Because of you. I just spilled some water. Alexander looked at her then. Really looked at her. You did so much more than that, Emma. You chose courage when fear would have been easier. That matters. Something passed between them in that moment. Not romance. Not attraction. But understanding. Recognition. 2 people who had both survived terrible things and were trying to build something better. On the 14th day, Alexander got the evidence he needed. He presented everything to the authorities. Federal investigators. The police. Lawyers. All of it documented. Irrefutable. The arrests happened that same evening. Emma watched the news with Sophia, seeing the executives being led away in handcuffs. Seeing Alexander's company being investigated. Seeing the truth finally coming to light. It's over, Alexander said that night. He looked exhausted but relieved. You're safe now. Both of you. You can go home. Emma looked around at the house that had become strangely comfortable. And then what? And then you go back to your life. Alexander paused. But Emma, I'd like to help. With nursing school. Your tuition. Living expenses while you study. Alexander, I can't accept. It's not charity, he interrupted gently. It's an investment. You saved my life. Let me invest in yours. Emma looked at him. This billionaire who had entered her life in the most unexpected way. Why? She asked. Why does this matter so much to you? Alexander was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. My whole life, people have wanted things from me. My money. My connections. My power. They smile and pretend and calculate what they can gain. He looked up at her. But you? You risked everything for a stranger. You expected nothing in return. You reminded me that goodness still exists in this world. Tears pricked Emma's eyes. I just did what anyone should do. But most people don't. That's what makes it extraordinary. 6 months later, Emma walked into her first day of nursing school at Boston University. She wore new clothes. Not expensive, but nice. Clean. Without any holes or stains. Her textbooks were paid for. Her tuition was covered. For the first time in years, she could focus on learning instead of just surviving. In the audience at orientation, Sophia sat with Mrs. Chun, waving enthusiastically and grinning with pride. And in the back row, barely visible, sat Alexander Hayes. He'd kept his distance over those months. A phone call here. A coffee meeting there. He respected her boundaries, understanding that Emma needed to build her new life on her own terms. But he was there when it mattered. When her car broke down, it was mysteriously repaired. When Sophia got sick and needed expensive medication, it appeared at their door. When Emma doubted herself, worried she wasn't smart enough or strong enough for nursing school, a text would arrive. You're stronger than you know. Keep going. Their friendship grew slowly, carefully, built on respect and understanding rather than romance or obligation. 2 people from completely different worlds, connected by one moment that had changed everything. 3 years later, Emma graduated from nursing school. Top of her class. She got a job at Boston Children's Hospital, working in pediatrics. Helping sick children. Being the kind of person she'd always dreamed of becoming. At her graduation, As she walked across the stage in her cap and gown, she looked out at the audience. Sophia, now 9 years old, was on her feet cheering louder than anyone else. Mrs. Chun dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. And Alexander was there too, clapping with genuine pride for the woman who had saved his life and, in a way, changed it forever. After the ceremony, Alexander found her in the crowd. "Congratulations, Nurse Rodriguez." Emma smiled. The title still felt new and wonderful. "Thank you. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have," Alexander said firmly. "You would have found a way. You always do. I just made the path a little easier." "Why did you do all this?" Emma asked. "Really? It's been 3 years. You didn't owe me anything." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. "Do you remember what you told me about the woman who helped you leave your abusive relationship? How she gave you that phone number that saved your life, and you never saw her again?" Emma nodded. "You said, 'Sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them. They do what needs to be done, and then they're gone.'" Alexander smiled. "But I didn't want to be gone. I wanted to see what happened next. To watch you become the person you were always meant to be." Sophia ran up then, throwing her arms around her mother. "Mama, you did it. You're a real nurse now." Emma hugged her daughter tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her hair, feeling the weight of how far they'd come. From that tiny apartment where they'd counted pennies and worried about every bill to this moment. Graduation. A good job. A future that looked bright instead of desperate. "I did it, baby," Emma whispered. "We did it." That evening, Emma stood in her new apartment. Bigger than the old one. In a safer neighborhood. But still modest. Still hers. She thought about the woman at the pharmacy who'd given her that phone number years ago. Wondered where she was now. Hoped she knew somehow that her small act of courage had created this. A nurse who would go on to help hundreds of sick children. A little girl who would grow up safe and loved. A life that mattered. "Thank you," Emma whispered to that unknown woman wherever she was. "Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." And then she made a promise to herself. She would be that person for someone else. When she saw someone struggling, someone scared, someone who needed help, she would act. She would be brave. She would spill the water glass. Because that's how the world changes. Not through grand gestures or dramatic heroics, but through ordinary people making extraordinary choices in small moments. Through kindness rippling outward like waves on water, touching lives in ways we can never fully measure. Emma Rodriguez had been invisible for so long. Trying to survive. Trying to protect her daughter. Trying to just get through each day. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was a nurse. A mother. A woman who had found her courage and used it to save a life. And in saving that life, she had somehow saved her own. Now, let me ask you something. What's your water glass moment? What's that situation you're going to face, or maybe you're facing right now, where you have to choose between looking away and acting? Because here's the truth. We all get those moments. Times when we see something wrong and have to decide whether to act or stay silent. Times when helping someone else might cost us something. Might be risky. Might complicate our lives. This story is a reminder that those moments matter. That courage doesn't always look like fighting dragons or saving the world. Sometimes it looks like a waitress spilling a glass of water. Sometimes it looks like a stranger handing someone a phone number. Sometimes it looks like choosing kindness when fear would be easier. You have that power too. Every single day, you have the chance to be the person who acts instead of looking away, who helps instead of ignoring, who spills the water glass when someone's life depends on it. You never know how far those ripples will reach. You never know whose life you might save. Emma didn't know that spilling that water would lead to nursing school, a new life, a future she'd only dreamed about. That woman at the pharmacy didn't know her phone number would save 2 lives. You won't know either. But that's the beauty of it. That's the power of it. So be brave. Be kind. Be the person who acts. Because the world needs more people like Emma Rodriguez. Ordinary people who make extraordinary choices in crucial moments. The world needs you. Your moment is coming. Maybe it's already here. And when it arrives, I hope you remember Emma's story. I hope you remember that one choice can change everything. I hope you spill the water glass. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this remind us what really matters. And remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and capable of changing someone's world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time, Keep being the courage someone else needs.